I woke up that morning to the kind of sunlight that feels like a promise, a warm, golden wash that slipped through the curtains and stretched across the wooden floor in slow-moving stripes, and for a few blissful seconds, as I lay there listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator down the hall and the faint rustle of the trees outside, I allowed myself to believe that today would be a perfect day. It was Lucas's birthday. My sweet, wide-eyed little boy who, somehow, was turning 8 years old, and the thought of seeing his face light up when he saw the decorations and the cake and the pile of presents made my chest feel almost too full. The preparations had consumed my entire week, not out of obligation, but out of a deep desire to make this day magical for him in every way possible. I had strung electric blue streamers across the living room, weaving them through the doorways so they swayed lightly whenever someone passed by, and I had tied balloons in bunches, anchoring them to the backs of chairs so that they floated above like cheerful sentinels. In the kitchen, the scent of the chocolate cake I had baked the night before was still lingering, rich and sweet, blending with a faint tang of the frosting I had smoothed on in careful swirls. Sarah, my best friend since college and my self-appointed co-host for the day, had been there early to help me arrange snacks on the table, her meticulous hands positioning each plate like she was setting a stage. By midday, the house had filled with the bright chaos that only children can create. Lucas's friends darted through the backyard, chasing each other in looping patterns that made me dizzy just watching, their laughter spilling in through the open windows in a constant stream. In the living room, clusters of parents stood with coffee cups in hand, exchanging the small talk of people who only really know each other through the lens of their children's friendships. Every so often, a burst of giggles would rise from the corner where Lucas was showing off the model cars he'd been collecting, and I would catch a glimpse of him, his hair a little mussed, cheeks flushed from running around, the very image of happiness. But beneath my own smile, there was a knot of unease, because there was still someone who hadn't arrived, and the absence felt heavier with each passing minute. My mother, Margaret. Even thinking her name brought with it the weight of years of strained conversations, sharp silences, and carefully controlled expressions. The last time we had spoken face-to-face had been nearly a year ago, and though there had been no shouting, no dramatic scene, the tension had been thick enough to taste. She had always had a way of making her disapproval felt, not through raised voices or cutting words, but through the subtle, almost surgical way she could withdraw warmth, leaving you shivering without ever quite knowing when it had started. I had debated whether to invite her at all. There were a dozen reasons not to, all of them valid, but when I thought about Lucas, about how he still asked about her sometimes in that open, trusting way children do, I couldn't bring myself to deny him the chance to have his grandmother at his birthday party. So the invitation had gone out, and I had told myself that maybe, just maybe, the day would bring with it some kind of truce, however temporary. It was just after 1 o'clock when the doorbell rang. My stomach tightened instinctively, but I smoothed down the front of my dress, took a deep breath, and went to open the door. She stood there exactly as I had imagined she would, perfectly put together, her dark hair pinned into place so neatly that not a single strand dared escape, a pale blue blouse that made her look almost regal, and a thin gold chain at her throat catching the afternoon light. Her perfume, sharp and floral, with an icy undertone, wrapped around me as she stepped inside, and for a moment, the scent felt like a memory I didn't want to revisit. "Mom," I said, my smile careful, trying to bridge the gap between us with nothing more than a word. She nodded, her eyes sweeping over the room in a slow, deliberate scan. "You've done a lot," she murmured, the pause between the words long enough for me to wonder whether it was meant as praise or quiet criticism. Before I could decide, Lucas appeared, running toward us with all the unguarded joy of a child who still believed that the adults in his life would always welcome each other with open arms. "Grandma," he shouted, flinging his arms around her legs. She patted his head, her hand light, almost perfunctory, as though she were careful not to disturb the crisp lines of her blouse. I guided her toward the living room, where Sarah caught my eye over the rim of her coffee cup and gave me the tiniest of looks, the kind of look only a best friend can give, one that asked without words, "Are you okay?" I nodded, though I could feel the tightness in my throat already. We reached a spot near the coffee table, and I leaned in slightly to make sure she was comfortable. That's when it happened. She tilted her head toward mine, her breath brushing my ear, and in a voice so low that no one else could possibly hear, she said, "You're not welcome here." The words hit me like the sudden plunge into icy water, a shock so complete that it took a beat before I could even process what she had said. I pulled back, my eyes searching hers for any sign that I had misheard her, for the faintest curve of a smile that might mean she was joking. But her face was as still and unreadable as a statue. "What?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper, but she had already shifted her gaze toward the group of children laughing on the floor, her expression smoothing into one of distant politeness. My pulse was pounding in my ears, a steady, insistent thud that made the rest of the room seem distant, almost muffled. I became aware, in that strange, heightened way you sometimes do in moments of shock, of the tiniest details. The way one of the balloons bumped gently against the ceiling, the sound of a child's shoes squeaking against the hardwood, the faint clink of a coffee spoon against a mug. Across the room, Sarah's eyes were still on me, her expression now tinged with something sharper, concern, maybe even the beginnings of anger on my behalf. Daniel, my younger brother, had just arrived, his easy smile lighting up his face as he waved at me, completely unaware of the frost that had just seeped into the air between our mother and me. I swallowed hard, forcing my feet to move, to carry me toward the kitchen under the guise of fetching more coffee. My mind was a jumble of questions. Why? Why today, of all days? What had I done this time? It's strange, but I've learned the hard way that family gatherings can change direction with the speed of a storm front, shifting from laughter to heartbreak before you even realize the clouds have rolled in. And if you've ever been blindsided like that by someone you thought you could trust, then you'll understand why I'm telling the story, and maybe, just maybe, you'll want to stay with me and subscribe, because these stories aren't just mine. They might be yours too. I steadied myself against the counter, taking a long breath before rejoining the party. Lucas was across the room, his cheeks pink with excitement as he explained to one of his friends how the new model car's wheels could actually spin like a real one. He didn't notice the tension yet, and I wanted to keep it that way for as long as I could. For the next 30 minutes, I moved through the motions as if nothing had happened, smiling when I needed to, laughing at the right moments, handing out plates and napkins like a hostess on autopilot. But my mother's presence was a constant shadow at the edge of my vision, cold and unyielding. Each time our eyes met, hers flicked away, and each time it happened, I felt the sting of her words all over again. At one point, I found myself standing beside Daniel. He leaned toward me and muttered, "She's in a mood," tilting his head in our mother's direction. "Yeah," I replied, my tone tighter than I intended. "Something like that." It wasn't long after that when I caught another small, telling moment. I was carrying a tray of cupcakes into the dining room when I saw my mother lean towards Sarah, her lips moving in a whisper. Sarah's eyes widened for just a fraction of a second before she forced a polite laugh and nodded. I didn't ask her what had been said, not yet, because there was still cake to cut, candles to light, and a little boy who had been dreaming about this day for weeks. But the 4 words my mother had whispered to me earlier seemed to echo louder with each passing minute, as though the walls themselves were repeating them back at me. I had no way of knowing then just how much louder they were about to become. If there was one thing I had learned from years of dealing with my mother, it was that she never did anything without purpose. Every word, every pause, every sidelong glance was deliberate, and even the silences carried meaning, usually the kind that made my stomach twist. So as I moved through the rest of Lucas's birthday party that afternoon, trying to smile, trying to make sure the children kept laughing and the guests kept mingling, I knew deep down that her whisper earlier, "You're not welcome here," hadn't been some fleeting outburst. It had been the first tremor before something larger. I kept my eyes on Lucas as much as possible, because watching him helped me keep my composure. He was so happy, so wrapped up in the magic of the day, that it gave me something to cling to. But every time I caught my mother's profile in the corner of the room, the way she would lean towards someone, lips moving in that subtle, conspiratorial way, I felt a fresh knot form in my chest. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I could see the effect. A raised eyebrow here. A quick glance in my direction there. A faint smile that wasn't friendly at all. Sarah noticed it too. At one point, she drifted past me with a tray of juice boxes for the kids and murmured, "She's working the room." The way she said it, low, careful, like someone reporting on a gathering storm, made me realize that I wasn't imagining things. I tried to shake it off. The cake was ready. The candles were waiting. Lucas's little friends were gathered around the table, bouncing in their seats, chanting his name in that high-pitched, excited way that kids do. I took my place beside him, and as we all began to sing, I focused on the moment. The warm glow of the candles lighting his face, the way his eyes flicked toward me with pure joy, the sound of his laughter as he made a wish and blew out the candles in one determined breath. The applause that followed felt genuine, but it was fleeting. My mother stood up almost immediately afterward, her voice carrying over the chatter. "Before we cut the cake," she said, "I think I'd like to say a few words." The room quieted. Even Lucas looked up at her with a curious tilt of his head. My heart sank because I knew this was it. This was the reason she had come. Not for her grandson. Not for me. For this. She stepped closer to the center of the room, clasping her hands in front of her like she was about to deliver a toast at a wedding. "I suppose most of you know I haven't seen Emily in some time," she began, her tone smooth, almost warm, but there was a steel edge underneath that only those who really knew her could hear. And there are reasons for that. I felt every eye in the room flick toward me, then back to her. My throat went dry. She went on. "It's important for family to be honest, isn't it? To tell the truth, even when it's hard." She glanced around as if inviting agreement. A few people nodded reflexively. "I've always believed that the truth will come out eventually," she continued. "And today, well, it seems as good a time as any." I took a step forward. "Mom," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is Lucas's day. Whatever you think you need to say." But she cut me off with a slight raise of her hand. "Emily," she said, in that firm tone that had ended many arguments when I was a teenager, "you've told people a certain story about why you've kept your distance from this family. But you've left out some very important details." I could feel my pulse in my temples. "This isn't the time." I tried again, but she was already pressing forward. "You've all been led to believe that Emily simply moved on," she said, sweeping her gaze over the guests. "That she needed space. But the truth is, she walked away. She abandoned us, abandoned her responsibilities, and she's been doing it for years." There was a murmur among the adults. My brother Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Sarah's jaw tightened. "That's not true," I said, louder this time, but my mother didn't pause. "She doesn't tell you," she continued, "about the choices she made, the people she hurt, the way she's kept Lucas from knowing his family." That was the first time she said his name, and I saw Lucas's head snap toward her. His brow furrowed, confused. My stomach clenched. "And maybe," she added, her eyes locking on mine, "maybe she hasn't told Lucas everything he deserves to know. About his father. About why things really are the way they are." The air seemed to thicken. I heard the faint scrape of a chair as someone shifted. Sarah took a step closer to Lucas instinctively, her eyes on me, waiting for my cue. I knew I should shut it down. End it right there, take control of the moment, but part of me was frozen. It wasn't just the humiliation of having my life picked apart in front of friends, neighbors, and my child. It was the knowledge that she was about to cross a line that could never be uncrossed. I forced my voice out, slow but sharp. "Mom, don't." She tilted her head slightly, that almost smile curling at the edges of her mouth. "Why not, Emily? You've kept it hidden long enough. Maybe it's time everyone, including your son, knows that his father didn't just leave. He was pushed away. By you." There was a collective intake of breath. Lucas's eyes widened, darting from her to me. "Mom," he said softly, his voice almost lost in the noise of the room. I took a step toward him, but my mother's words landed first. And maybe, she said, her voice quieter now but no less sharp, maybe that's why you've never really been welcome here. Because deep down, you know what you did. For a heartbeat, there was silence. And then the sound of it all sinking in. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." I heard the clink of a fork hitting a plate. Lucas's small, uncertain voice again. "Is that true?" I looked at him. At my little boy, standing there in his birthday crown, holding the edge of the table with frosting smudged on his fingers, and I knew this was the moment everything had been building toward. And if you've ever been in that position, standing there with your heart in your throat, knowing that one wrong word could shatter something precious. You'll understand why I'm telling you this now, and why I want you to subscribe, not just to hear how this ends, but because stories like these are about more than just drama. They're about how we survive the moments we think will break us. I took a breath. "Lucas," I said, "go with Aunt Sarah for a minute, okay?" But my mother spoke over me one last time, her voice ringing out clear and final.
"No, Emily.
He should stay. He should hear exactly who you are." That was it. That was the spark that lit everything. I felt the blood rush to my face, my hands curling into fists at my sides. The room was no longer quiet. It was holding its breath. And when I finally spoke, my voice shook not from fear, but from the effort of keeping it steady. "You want the truth?" I said, locking eyes with her.
Fine.
Let's tell them all the truth. The room was no longer a place where people had come to celebrate a child's birthday. It had transformed into a silent stage, every guest holding their breath, their eyes darting between my mother and me as if they were watching the final act of a play they didn't realize they had bought tickets for. I could feel the tension in the air, a taut wire stretched so thin it might snap at any second. My hands were trembling, though not from fear anymore. This wasn't about embarrassment now.
It wasn't even about me.
It was about Lucas. My little boy, whose big day had been hijacked by an old wound my mother had chosen to rip wide open in front of everyone. I could see him out of the corner of my eye, frozen in place beside Sarah, his expression caught between confusion and hurt. 8 years old, and already hearing words that no child should have to process. I took a step toward my mother, closing the gap between us, my voice low but strong. "You think you're helping him?" I said, each word deliberate. "You think this is some kind of gift, throwing pieces of the past to him like broken glass? You're not protecting him. You're hurting him. And you've been doing it for as long as I can remember." Her eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. That silence was her weapon, the one she had used my entire life, letting me fill the space with my own pain, my own explanations, until I was exhausted. But not this time. "You want the truth?"
Fine.
"Here it is," I said, my voice rising just enough to carry to the back of the room. Lucas's father didn't just leave. We left each other. Because we couldn't make it work, and because he made choices that no child should grow up around. That's the truth. I made a choice to protect my son, and if that means I've been unwelcome in your house, then maybe that's the best thing that's ever happened. There was a murmur among the guests, a shifting of bodies, a clearing of throats. Daniel's eyes met mine briefly, and I saw something there that looked like quiet support. Sarah's hand rested on Lucas's shoulder, steady and reassuring. But my mother wasn't done. She leaned in slightly, her words just for me, though I knew others could hear. "You've rewritten the past to make yourself the hero, Emily. But I was there. I saw what you did." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the absurdity of it hit me all at once. "You were there for parts of it," I said. "And for the rest, you chose not to be. That's the difference between us." I stayed with him. Every day. Every night. I've been there for every scraped knee, every bad dream, every math test, every birthday. You've been there when it suited you, and now you want to rewrite the story to make yourself the victim. The look on her face shifted then, a flicker of something that might have been anger, or maybe fear that she was losing control of the room. "This isn't your moment," I continued, my voice steady now. "It's his. And if you can't be here for him without trying to tear me down, then you need to leave." A collective breath seemed to go through the guests. My mother's eyes swept the room, perhaps looking for an ally, but none of the faces met her with the kind of solidarity she was seeking. Even Daniel, though silent, had moved slightly closer to Lucas. "I'm not leaving," she said finally, her tone sharp, but there was a thinness to it now. "Then I will," I said. And with that, I turned to Sarah. "Can you grab Lucas's things?" Sarah didn't hesitate. She nodded, her movements quick and deliberate, guiding Lucas toward the hallway where his jacket and backpack were. I bent down to his level as he came over, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "We're going to go somewhere else, okay? Somewhere quiet. We'll have our own cake, just you and me." He nodded slowly, his eyes still wide, but I could see the relief in them, relief that we were leaving this strange battlefield of a living room. As Sarah handed me his jacket, my mother's voice cut through the air one last time. "You're running away again, Emily. Just like you always do." I turned back to face her, holding Lucas's hand. "No, Mom," I said, my voice calm in a way I hadn't expected. "I'm protecting my son. There's a difference. And if you cared about him more than you care about being right, you'd understand that." I didn't wait for her reply.
I didn't need to.
The point had been made, not just to her, but to everyone in the room. I opened the front door, the cool air rushing in to meet us, and stepped out into the sunlight. The street was quiet compared to the house we had just left. I could hear birds somewhere nearby, and the sound felt almost jarringly normal after the storm we had walked through. Sarah followed us out, carrying a box that held a generous portion of cake, her expression soft with understanding. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. "Did I?" I asked more to myself than to her, because the truth was, I wasn't sure yet. Protecting Lucas had always been my guiding star, but the ache in my chest told me that even doing the right thing can hurt like hell. We walked the short distance to Sarah's car, and once Lucas was buckled in, I stood there for a moment, letting the breeze cool my flushed face. I could still hear the echo of my mother's words, but I knew they would fade. What mattered now was the small hand resting in mine, trusting me completely. As we drove away, Lucas finally spoke. "Mom." "Yes, baby?" "Is Grandma mad at you?" I took a slow breath. "Maybe," I said honestly. "But that's not your fault. And it's not your job to fix it. Sometimes grown-ups get upset with each other, and it's not because of the kids. Do you understand?" He nodded, though I knew the understanding was partial, the way it is for an 8-year-old trying to make sense of the complicated adult world. We ended up at Sarah's house, where she had an old set of birthday candles in a drawer and a carton of vanilla ice cream in the freezer. We set the cake down on her kitchen table, lit the candles again, and this time, there were no speeches, no accusations, just me, Lucas, and Sarah singing a little off-key. As Lucas blew out the candles for the second time that day, I felt a strange mix of sadness and peace. Sadness for the fact that my own mother would probably never be the grandmother I had hoped for him, but peace in knowing that I had chosen his happiness over my need to win an argument. Later that evening, when Lucas was asleep on Sarah's couch with a smear of frosting still on his cheek, I sat with my friend, sipping tea in the quiet. "You know," Sarah said, "you could have stayed and fought with her. A lot of people would have." "I've been fighting with her my whole life," I said. "But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that you can't win against someone who's only interested in being right. The only way to win is to stop playing." Sarah smiled faintly. "That's going to make a hell of a story one day." I looked over at Lucas, curled up under a blanket, and felt the corners of my mouth lift. It already is. And if you've ever had to choose between peace and proving your point, you'll understand why I made that choice. And maybe you'll subscribe so we can talk about the times you've had to walk away for your own good. Because those stories matter. They remind us that sometimes leaving isn't running away. Sometimes it's the bravest thing you can do.